American national government. This is Dr. Patrick Stewart. Chapter 12, Congress. With this segment, we'll be considering the learning objective of identifying the responsibilities of representatives and senators. But the first step is to do a comparison of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The U.S. system is bicameral. In other words, there are two bodies. And the reason for these two bodies is that you will have the representation of different interests, as well as the fostering of deliberative and careful lawmaking. As a result, you have specific rules for the different bodies. For instance, the House of Representatives deals with budgetary issues, whereas the Senate, by the Constitution, is set to confirm presidential nominees while playing a major role in foreign policy. But beyond this, we see that there are very interesting and very major differences between the bodies. As we can see from this table, we see that there are multiple different attributes for these different bodies that play a role in how they operate. So, for instance, we're looking at the House of Representatives, and there are 435 representatives that serve 2-year terms. As a result of this, and this is due to them representing different districts within their states, and it's based upon population. Now, the Senate, for its part, 2 senators per state, so that's 100 senators, and they serve longer terms, 6 years. So when we look at and compare, we see that the House of Representatives is more hierarchical. It's a top-down approach with more control from the top, as well as a tendency to respond to partisan desires. There are also more rigid rules, such as limited debate, and there is also a focus on policy specialization. However, as a result of this body is much quicker to act than is the Senate, which in turn is less hierarchical, slower to act, there is unlimited debate, there are less rigid rules, and there's more personal connections because of the 6 years and fewer representatives to deal with. And tied with this is greater prestige. But moving beyond that, we have to take a look at what are the primary responsibilities for Congress. Now, the first of these is lawmaking, and the second is representation. We'll go over those in greater detail in a bit here. But the secondary responsibilities also bear discussing briefly. First of all, due to checks and balances, there is the possibility of impeachment, and this is focused upon the executive branch or the judicial branch. But also there is policing that goes on within the body itself with the seating and disciplining of members. In other words, allowing for those to represent the body and removing those who are seen as not worthy of serving their constituents. There's also the selecting of leaders for the executive branch, and there's a range of policy responsibilities that come with being a representative. So let's take a look at the primary responsibility tied with lawmaking. Now, lawmaking refers to enacting laws that address major problems and concerns of American society. And this is certainly something that will continue to occur because society is constantly changing and adapting to new populations, new technologies, and changes within the environment at large. Now, there are several steps that go on within this. First of all, we've got agenda setting. And this is where decisions are made as to what to make a decision about. And then once you make a decision, you have to go to the second stage, which is policy formulation and adoption. It's not just enough to say we need to, pass this law, but you also have to think about how do you formulate it? How do you carry it out? Now, these first 2 steps are the ones that are specifically tied with the legislative branch through the constitutional separation of powers. The next 2 are tied with the executive branch, but they also involve the legislative branch. And this is policy implementation, which is the actual carrying out of policy, the execution of policy, as well as policy evaluation, which is how well did these policies affect what they're supposed to affect. In other words, not just what are the outputs, but also what are the outcomes. So when we look at this, the first 2 steps involve the legislative branch, agenda setting, policy formulation, and adoption. And this moves on to the next step, which is oversight, which involves those latter two steps. So while the president takes the lead on implementing legislation and Congress has delegated rulemaking authority to the executive branch due to the high level of complexity and massive amounts of regulations that need to be carried out, Congress has extended its authority into implementation through the legislative oversight of administration. Now, this can occur through such things as the creation and abolishment of different government agencies. It can be the assigning of agencies particular program responsibilities. Providing or withholding funding is one of those major factors to be considered because obviously the House of Representatives has the power of the purse. And finally, the Senate has the ability to confirm or not confirm presidential appointments. And these appointments are the ones who are tasked with leading these different agencies. So what we're looking at here is, while it's not a direct impact, the legislative branch does have an influence on the executive branch's policy implementation and evaluation. Now, beyond this, if we go ahead and segment out the different representatives' responsibilities, we can see that the congressional office holder responds to the needs and wants of citizens through four different means. The first is most obviously that of policy responsiveness. Here, representatives are expected to vote the way their constituents want them to vote, whether they act as trustees making decisions on their own, but relying upon their insight and their interpretation of what's going on, their expertise, so to speak, or whether they're acting as delegates, just basically making the decisions that their constituents want, or some combination of these two, is up to the representative. But if the representative strays too far afield, then their constituents will let them know. The next type of representation is service responsiveness, or casework. Here, legislators perform a variety of tasks for their constituents. And this is especially when dealing with the federal government and dealing with the administration of it. So we can see it in such things as whether or not different streets are taken care of, or if there are problems with agencies carrying out their actions. Then the representatives will step in and use their inherent power of the purse as well as their prestige to influence the regulatory bodies and the administrative bodies. Now, tied with the budgetary approach is that of allocation responsiveness. Here, the congressional office holder, the representatives, use their positions to see that their district gets the share of the benefits of government programs. Now, this might be considered pork barrel politics, but indeed, this is one of the ways that there can be buy-in from constituents with government interactions. And over the years, we've seen it. NASA, one of their key plans and their key methods was to make sure that there was one part of the space program that was being built in every representative's district throughout the United States. And it was a very successful strategy. And certainly we see that the Pentagon, with its massive spending on throughout the United States, does have a major influence over representatives. Now, finally, we have such things as symbolic responsiveness. And these are the activities that use broad political symbols to develop a close relationship with constituents. So this might be a lot of, basically standing up, cutting ribbons into new businesses, being seen with powerful leaders. These are things that let the constituents know that their representative is working on behalf of them and is indeed a powerful individual who can, so to speak, bring home the bacon. So one of the things that we consider is that while Congress as a body tends to have negative net approval ratings, the net approval rating of their own representative tends to be relatively high. Although what we have seen is that this has diminished. Now, part of this might be due to a current appreciation for the representatives serving moneyed interest to a greater extent than the constituents who vote for them. So there might be a higher level of cynicism that comes with dealing with a body that is seen as not being representative of the general population. Now, these are certainly issues that need to be addressed, But the next step is to consider what exactly the representatives do when they get to Washington, D.C., and what the process of legislation looks like. American national government.